Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. If you haven't been here before, my name is Cameron Lawrence, and today we're discussing the top 7 biggest busts from the 2023 fantasy football season. We're going to go over the guys that have disappointed you more than anyone else. I got them in no particular order, just the 7 guys that I thought were the worst for your fantasy team this season. If you missed it on Wednesday, Ty did the 7 best values, 7 best steals, whatever you want to call it. Before I jump in, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure to turn on notifications because we got off-season content coming for you all year long. Rookie breakdowns, free agent moves. I'm just getting you ready for 2024. But I won't waste any more of your time. So let's jump right in. The first player we're going to talk about is Austin Ekeler. Not a surprise to anybody that he's on this list. His ADP was the 104. And he was the running back 22 in points per game with only 13.2 points. That is not what you wanted to see, right? Last season, 21.9 points per game. And, we weren't necessarily expecting him to repeat that, we've seen the last 2 seasons, but we were expecting him to get close if he's got an ADP of 104. And yet he was nowhere close. He almost cut it in half. He killed you down the stretch. And then on top of that, he missed 4 games due to injury. So not only did he miss time, but when he was on the field, other than his first couple games, he wasn't great. He averaged 13 attempts, only 44 yards on the ground, 0.4 touchdowns a game. These last couple of years, he was up around 1 touchdown a game almost, so that came down immensely. I still averaged about 5.3 targets per game, only 3.6 receptions, 31 yards through the air, and he only had 1 receiving touchdown in the entire season. To just compare where he went in drafts, Christian McCaffrey, the other guy, obviously taken right next to him at 24.5 fantasy points per game. He had 127 total yards to Ekeler's 71, and he had 1.3 touchdowns per game to Ekeler's 0.5. So very different, 11-point per game difference there. Not what you want to see. Very disappointing if you took Ekeler, and it really could have ruined your season for him to be on your team. We're going to stick with the running back position. We got a couple of running backs that we're going to talk about in a row here. We're going to go Miles Sanders next. ADP of at the 501. And this one's disappointing for me. This one's the guy, if you just listened to our last podcast, that I knew I shouldn't have taken. I knew I shouldn't have been high on, and I still was. He was running back 59 on the season with 5.5 points per game. He started 3 games, and that was it. And then he was hurt for the next 2, and then he missed a full week, and then they had the bye, and then he came back, and he never played over 40% of snaps again. Right? This was Chuba Hubbard's team. Chuba Hubbard had, I think, 277 touches on the season, and Miles Sanders didn't see anything close to that. Sanders never had over 75 rushing yards in a game. He only had 2 10-point PPR fantasy point games, and you really had 1 good week. So, yeah, it was very disappointing. Obviously, it's in the 5th round, RB dead zone, right? We're all warned about that, but there was a lot of hype going into it, right? We talked about the contracts. 3 years, $21 million. The coach was saying, hey, we're going to get you the ball in space. Chuba Hubbard didn't seem like a guy who was going to be a threat at all, right? Deonta Foreman carried this backfield last year. Hubbard couldn't even get in. Hubbard took over. Sanders was non-existent. Speaking of a guy who was non-existent, this next running back did pretty much the same thing as Dameon Pierce. He was taken almost a round before Sanders at the 404. This was a guy that all of us fellas were out on. We all told you, hey, stay away. Devin Singletary is going to be a problem. Pierce finished just ahead of Sanders as the running back 57 and 5.9 points per game. He only played 3 games all year with over 50% snap share, and that was weeks 3 through 5, where he had 14.9, 11.8, and 9.2 fantasy points. And he finished as a top 3 running back, or top 24 running back in only those 3 weeks, and then he never saw over 50 rushing yards after week 5, and never had more than 3 receptions. Or more than 1 reception after week 3. So he wasn't involved in the passing game, wasn't getting down on the ground. He was the clear backup. He even saw special teams snaps. So it was disgusting all around for Dameon Pierce. He was another guy that could have killed you. And it's crazy to think you could have left your draft with Ekeler, Dameon Pierce, and Miles Sanders. And that would have been a tough start. All right, we're going to move on to the wide receiver position, and we're going to talk about Cooper Kupp. And for me, Cooper Kupp is the Austin Ekeler of wide receivers right now. His ADP was a 203, But if you were drafting earlier, maybe best ball drafts, if your league just drafts earlier, you were drafting him much earlier, as early as like the 104, 105, before we found out about his injury coming up. He is the same as Ekeler, missed I think he missed 5 weeks actually. But Cooper Kupp, wide receiver 25 points per game, 13.7. Wide receiver 40 overall. He had as many finishes inside the top 20 as outside the top 50, right? Cooper Kupp was the guy that we said, hey, draft because he's bust proof. He's not going to kill you on a week. And this year, 5 separate weeks where he was slotted to play, where you were putting him in your lineup. He was outside the top 50 on top of those 4 other weeks where he did not play at all. He only went over 55 yards 4 times, which is mind-boggling. And the worst part was, it was those first 2 weeks he was back, too, were 2 of those 4 weeks. So you were excited. You thought, hey, I got Cooper Kupp. I knew Puka Nacua was playing great, but Cooper Kupp is back. And he, it's just 10 and 12 in the other 2 weeks that he went over 55 yards. In weeks 10 and 12 points, excuse me. I just misread my notes. 10 and 12 points in weeks 16 and 17 in the playoff weeks. So he killed. I mean, he's your alpha. You're hoping for big points, and he just didn't give it to you there. You were hoping for what we saw from Alvin Kamara, right? He came back, was phenomenal right away. You thought you were going to get it, and you just didn't. We're going to go to a little bit of a later round, wide receiver here with Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy's ADP was 703. Talk about a guy who just disappeared. Jerry Jeudy was that wide receiver, 57 in points per game with 8.9. He didn't finish in the top 25 wide receivers until week 18. He waited till the last week when most of us aren't even playing fantasy at that point. He had 3 receptions or less in 12 games this season. 12. He only scored 2 touchdowns the whole year. And I'm going to list you real quick players with a higher points per game than Jerry Jeudy: Wan'Dale Robinson, Curtis Samuel, Michael Thomas, Josh Palmer, and Rashid Shaheed. That should not be it. We were hoping, hey, Sean Payton's coming in, revitalizing this offense. They're going to figure it out a little bit. Judy's going to take that step forward. None of that happened. They were a disgusting offense. Russ barely hit 3,000 yards on the season. Jerry Jeudy was pretty much non-existent. If you're a Jerry Jeudy believer, you are really hoping that he finds a new home this offseason. Next, we have our only quarterback on the list, and this is going to hurt a lot of people, but it's Patrick Mahomes. ADP at 202. 202 for a quarterback is extremely hard to live up to, right? He would have had to repeat 25-plus fantasy points per game to even get close to living up to it, and he did not. He was quarterback 11 in points per game with 18.4. I had a minimum of 8 games for those quarterbacks because like Flacco was a little bit higher, but he hadn't played 8 games. 1,100 passing yards less than last year for Patrick Mahomes. He had under a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio for the first time in his career, and he didn't score a single rushing touchdown. He did throw 50 less times than each of the last 2 years, and it's a bust based off of ADP, right? It's the same reason a lot of people consider Travis Kelce a bust. I personally couldn't put Kelce on this list because he was still the tight end 1 in points per game, right? He felt like he hurt, especially down the end of last part of the year. First half of the year, he's averaging 20 fantasy points a game. Second half of the year, he hurt you a lot, especially because you took him as essentially your wide receiver 1. Patrick Mahomes, however, right, he's the only guy in this slot. And man, Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, the 2 quarterbacks around him, 24 and 23, averaging 6 and 5 more fantasy points per game than Mahomes did. And the final guy on this list hurts us fellas as a whole is Tony Pollard, drafted at the 201, running back 23 in points per game with 13.1, right behind Austin Ekeler. He averaged only 5 points from the receiving game after averaging 7 points a game last year. His yards per carry went from 5.22 to 3.99. That's what did it. He had 250 carries. He had 50 receptions, but he only had 3.99 yards per carry. His yards per reception was also down on the year. It also hurt that he only had 6 total touchdowns after 12 last year, despite sharing the load with Zeke. So the worst part of this all is that he got the volume we thought he'd get. He got the role we were hoping he'd get. He just didn't perform, right? It's exactly what we thought. We thought, hey, they're going to give the ball to Tony Pollard. They're going to rely on him. He had over 300 touches this season. he just did not perform. The offensive line did not help him out, right? He had a very low yards before carry, but he did not perform to what we were hoping or what we were expecting him to do. Alrighty, that wraps up our top 7 busts for the season. I hope you agree. If you disagree, let me know who else you thought should have been on this list. I would love to see who else you guys thought. We had a couple of extra guys, so I want to see if we agree for who could have possibly made this list. Like I said, we got tons of content coming your way for the rest of the season. We got podcasts, shorts, YouTube videos, draft content, dynasty content, off-season content, free agent content, all over the place. We have it all right here. Subscribe and hit those notifications. Well, thank you for joining. Again, my name is Cameron Lawrence. You can follow me on TikTok. You can follow me on Twitter at CamelotFFF. But with that, I don't got anything else. We'll see you next week. Deuces.